It started on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon in a quiet Georgia suburb. The sun beat down on the cracked sidewalk as 74-year-old Margaret Ellis slowly pushed her shopping cart full of groceries toward her modest sedan. She wore oversized sunglasses, a floppy sun hat, and orthopedic shoes. Nothing about her screamed threat. But as she reached her car, a patrol cruiser eased up behind her. Two officers stepped out, hands on their belts, eyes locked onto her like she'd just robbed a bank. "Ma'am, we've had a report about suspicious activity in this lot," one of them said. Margaret tilted her head. "Suspicious how?" "You were seen looking into cars that weren't yours," the second officer said, glancing at her cart. "Mind if we ask for some ID?" Margaret gave a slow blink. "I'm 74 years old. I was checking for carts before someone ran into them." "Just routine," the first officer said, already stepping closer. "Let's go ahead and see your license." Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she slowly reached into her purse, pulled out her wallet, and paused. She stared at them calmly. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. One officer snorted. "Don't escalate. We can do this the easy way." They didn't know. Not yet. But they were about to. Next Part 2. Part 2 ChatGPT, Part 2, Credentials and Warnings ignored. Margaret handed over her license without a word. The younger officer, Davis, looked it over and chuckled under his breath. "Margaret Ellis. 1949. That makes you what, 75? 74, she corrected flatly. His partner, Officer Reynolds, gave the ID a once-over, then looked at Margaret's car. "You sure this is your vehicle? Looks a little new." "It's a 2009 Corolla," she said. "I bought it used." They ignored her. Davis walked toward the car, peering inside, while Reynolds stayed close, his posture stiff. Margaret stood still, the plastic bag in her hand rustling gently in the breeze. Her gaze didn't waver. "You ever been arrested, Ms. Ellis?" Reynolds asked, almost casually. Margaret slowly turned her head to face him. "You're wasting your time." Reynolds smirked. "We'll be the judge of that." As Officer Davis leaned into her passenger side window, Margaret gave one final warning. "Son, if you don't stop now, you're going to regret this. Deeply." He laughed. "Are you threatening an officer, ma'am?" "No," she said, removing her sunglasses. "I'm advising you." Reynolds faltered for half a second at the intensity in her eyes. Something in her voice wasn't just confident, it was commanding. Seasoned. Like someone who'd stared down worse than suburban patrol officers. But Davis didn't notice. He opened her car door without permission. And that's when she moved. Next Part 3. Part 3 ChatGPT, Part 3, a shift in power. Before Davis could even reach inside the vehicle, Margaret stepped forward, not fast, not aggressive, but deliberate. Her movement had a weight to it. A precision that didn't belong to a retiree. "Step away from the car," she said, voice low and firm. Davis straightened, scoffing. "Ma'am, step back or you'll be detained." Reynolds began to reach for his cuffs, but before his hand touched them, Margaret pivoted slightly, just enough to put space between herself and both men. Her stance shifted, feet apart, knees soft, shoulders square. It was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone with tactical training. Reynolds noticed. He froze mid-motion. Davis, oblivious, took a step toward her. "All right, that's it, hands behind your back." Margaret's hand moved, calmly, with surgical control, into her purse. For a brief moment, both officers reached for their weapons. But she didn't draw a weapon. She drew a card. A thick, faded ID encased in laminated plastic, with a blue border and a gold emblem. Across the top, United States Navy, retired. Beneath that, a title etched in crisp font, Master Chief Special Warfare Operator, SEAL, retired. Reynolds took a slow step back. Davis blinked, reading the card again, then again. I did 3 tours in Vietnam. 2 more in classified waters. Trained more than half the SEALs still active today, Margaret said. And unless your badge number outranks a Pentagon clearance, I suggest you close my door and step away. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum. Then a voice crackled over their radio. Dispatch to Unit 12, be advised, Chief Ellis is clear. Repeat, do not detain. Command flagged her file. That woman's a living citation. Reynolds turned pale. Davis didn't move. And Margaret? She didn't smile. She just looked at them both, and waited. Next Part 4. Part 4 ChatGPT, Part 4, the freeze officer Davis stepped back from the car as if burned. His jaw tightened, but his hands slowly lifted, palms out, as though he'd just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield. Reynolds spoke first, voice lower, more careful. We didn't know, ma'am. We were just, following procedure. Margaret interrupted, her tone calm but razor-sharp. Let me guess. Suspicious because I was black. Elderly. Alone. In a parking lot with a reusable bag. Reynolds stammered. No, that's not, you didn't ask about the car registration, she said, taking a step closer. You didn't run the plates before questioning me. You made assumptions. Dangerous ones. A small crowd had begun to gather at the edge of the lot. People recording. A few murmurs rising. One teenager whispered, "Is that for real? She's a SEAL." Margaret ignored them. I've buried teammates who never got to retire, she said, her voice tightening with the weight of memory. I didn't serve my country so I could come home and be interrogated at a grocery store by rookies with power complexes. Davis looked like he wanted to speak, wanted to fight back, but the words never came. Because just then, another cruiser pulled up. This one didn't have lights flashing. A higher-ranking officer stepped out, Captain Harass, judging by his stripes and the hush that fell over the other two. He took one look at Margaret and stopped cold. Chief Ellis, he said, eyes wide. I didn't know you were back in town. I was, Margaret said flatly, until your boys here tried to drag me out of my car. Captain Harass turned toward Davis and Reynolds with an expression that could have cracked stone. You two, inside the vehicle, now. Neither argued. Neither looked up. They vanished into the cruiser. Then the captain looked at Margaret again and straightened. Permission to speak freely, Chief. Margaret gave him a curt nod. Ma'am, on behalf of the department. I'm sorry. Deeply. She stared at him for a long beat. Then finally, she said, fix it. And with that, she got into her car. Not a single person in that lot missed the salute the captain gave as she closed her door. Next Part 5. Part 5 ChatGPT, Part 5, the aftershock. As Margaret pulled away from the parking lot, the silence left behind was louder than any siren. Bystanders were still recording, whispering, some in awe, others in disbelief. Inside the cruiser, Davis sat stiffly, staring at the dash, jaw clenched. Reynolds looked like he wanted to melt into the seat. Captain Harass stood outside for a long moment, then finally spoke into his radio. Dispatch, this is Captain Harass. Open an internal inquiry on officers Davis and Reynolds. Use keyword Ellis. Flag it priority. He took a deep breath before turning to address the small crowd. To those who witnessed the incident, that woman is Chief Margaret Ellis, one of the most decorated veterans in this nation's history. A Navy SEAL before most people knew women could even qualify. I'm not proud of what just happened here. But I will ensure it's not swept under the rug. A ripple of nods and murmurs passed through the crowd. Several phones kept filming. Meanwhile, Margaret didn't head straight home. She drove with calm purpose to a quiet veterans memorial park on the edge of town. It was a place she rarely visited, too many ghosts, but today, it felt right. She sat on a bench facing the granite wall etched with names. Dozens she knew. Some she'd bled with. A few she'd carried. She took off her sunglasses and whispered, "Still watching my 6, aren't you?" Then, her phone buzzed. A message from a federal liaison. "Heard what happened. Pentagon already issued a statement. You're being recognized at the Capitol next month. You good?" Margaret typed back with one thumb, "Always." She set the phone down, leaned back against the bench, and closed her eyes as the wind carried the faintest echo of waves and gunfire, memories of a life no one expected from a woman like her. But now the whole country would know. The end. Let me know if you want a title screen, video description, tags, or an image prompt to match. Part 6 ChatGPT, Part 6, the national response. By the next morning, Margaret Ellis's name was on every major news channel. A 74-year-old retired Navy SEAL. One of the first. A legend, now publicly known for something she never asked for, being profiled in her own neighborhood. Clips of the encounter spread fast. Not just the footage from bystanders, but the audio from the patrol car, leaked by someone inside the department. The world heard her voice, calm and cutting, and the disbelief in the officer's tone as her credentials came to light. One clip in particular went viral. "Officer, nervously, you're a SEAL." "Margaret, I am the SEAL." Within hours, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Chief Ellis, hashtag Respect the Uniform, hashtag SEALin. A lot military veterans across the country rallied behind her. Active duty officers posted messages of support. Even high-profile politicians issued statements praising her service, and quietly condemning the handling of the incident. By noon, the White House press secretary made a statement. Chief Ellis served this nation in silence for decades. What she faced yesterday should never happen to anyone, least of all a woman who risked her life to defend our freedoms. Margaret, meanwhile, remained quiet. She turned off her phone, declined interviews, and kept her routine: early coffee, quiet walks, and regular visits to the VA hospital to check in on younger vets. But the knock on her door later that week wasn't media. It was military. A decorated Marine colonel stood on her porch in full dress blues, holding a small wooden box. "Chief," he said, voice steady, "the Secretary of Defense asked me to deliver this personally." Margaret opened the box slowly. Inside, resting on navy velvet, was a newly minted Presidential Unit Citation, awarded posthumously to a team she'd once led on a mission so classified the details still weren't public. Except now, people wanted to know everything. Next. Part 7. Part 7 ChatGPT, Part 7, Unsealing the Past. Margaret stared at the citation in silence. The weight of it wasn't in the metal itself, it was in the years. The silence. The losses. The Marine colonel cleared his throat. "There's more, ma'am. The department is declassifying part of Operation Cold Mako. They're releasing a public summary next week." Her eyes narrowed. "They're unsealing Mako?" He nodded. "Enough to recognize what your team did. People are calling for your story to be told. Congress wants to honor you on the floor. And the Naval Special Warfare Command has requested you attend a panel for recruitment. They say young women need to know." Margaret let out a breath like a wave breaking after decades of pressure. "That op was never meant to see daylight," she muttered. "We weren't even supposed to be there." "I read the classified report," the colonel said. "You weren't just there, Chief. You led. You saved 9 operators and neutralized a threat that still gives half our analysts nightmares." She closed the box carefully and looked out the window, her thoughts distant. "You know what I remember most about that mission?" she asked. He shook his head. "The silence. The moment after we finished. No applause. No celebration. Just ocean and blood and knowing we'd vanish back into the dark." Now, decades later, the world wanted her in the light. And as reluctant as she wasn't going to hide anymore. That evening, she finally turned her phone back on. Messages flooded in, family, reporters, even old teammates. But one name froze her thumb over the screen. Commander Jason Holt. She hadn't spoken to him in over 30 years. Last she heard, he'd gone dark after retiring. Disappeared into some quiet Pacific island. The message was short, still watching your six, Chief. Proud of you. It's time they knew. She blinked back something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Not pain. Not anger. Permission. To be seen. Next Part 8. Part 8 ChatGPT, Part 8, the ceremony 2 weeks later, Margaret stood in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, surrounded by uniforms, suits, and the weight of history. She wore her navy dress whites, polished, pressed, and adorned with a chest full of medals most people had never seen outside of museums. Her posture was flawless. Regal. Like she'd never retired at all. The Speaker of the House approached the podium, tapping the mic. We are gathered today to honor Chief Margaret Ellis, not just for her unparalleled service to this country, but for the humility with which she bore it. Many of us did not know her name. That changes today. A thunderous applause followed. Margaret didn't smile. She nodded. When her turn came to speak, she moved slowly to the microphone, flanked by 2 active duty SEALs standing in crisp formation. She looked out across the crowd, lawmakers, generals, press, and civilians alike. She adjusted the mic just slightly. I never wanted recognition, she began. Not because I didn't think we earned it, but because the missions we undertook weren't meant for parades. The room fell silent. My team operated in places that officially didn't exist. We were the solution when diplomacy failed. When politics couldn't reach far enough, or fast enough. We knew what we signed up for. She paused, her gaze scanning the room. But what happened in that parking lot was a different kind of battlefield. One where assumptions, not enemies, become the danger. A few heads lowered. Others stared, eyes wide. I didn't speak out for myself, she continued. I spoke out because every veteran, no matter their gender, their age, or the way they look, deserves to be seen for who they are. Fully. Without suspicion. Another pause. The crowd was locked in place. Then she added, softer this time, service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. But respect shouldn't either. As she stepped back, the chamber rose to its feet. No slow clap. No hesitation. Just thunderous, unified applause. And Margaret, though still not smiling, allowed herself one quiet breath of peace. Next Part 9. Part 9 ChatGPT, Part 9. The legacy begins after the ceremony. The hallways of the Capitol buzzed with energy. Reporters clamored for quotes. Lawmakers approached with handshakes, photo requests, and prepared speeches. But Margaret only stayed long enough to meet with a few young female cadets from the Naval Academy. One of them, barely 20, with nervous eyes and trembling hands, stepped forward. Chief Ellis, she said, voice wavering, I didn't think someone like me could ever make it into the teams. Margaret looked her over, saw herself decades ago. Quiet. Underestimated. Deadly. She placed a hand on the cadet's shoulder. Don't let them tell you who you are, Margaret said. Let your work do that for you. The young woman's eyes welled up. Yes, ma'am. Margaret nodded once. Then go earn your trident. And make M regret ever doubting you. Word of her speech and mentorship spread fast. Within days, the Navy's recruitment sites saw a spike in interest from women, and not just in support roles. Real inquiries about special warfare. Margaret, however, stayed out of the spotlight. She returned to her quiet home. Her quiet routines. Her quiet life. Until her front door received a knock, not from military brass this time, but from a film director. One who'd read the newly declassified portions of Operation Cold Mako. "We want to tell your story," he said. Margaret raised a brow. "Hollywood?" He smiled. "With your permission, and your truth. No dramatizing. No glamorizing. Just the real woman behind the call sign." She stared at him for a long time. Then finally, "You tell it like it was. No edits." "Yes, ma'am." That night, she looked at the folded flag on her mantel, the one they gave her after her last operation. And beneath it, a photo of her original team. "Faces mostly gone now." She whispered to them, "We're finally being heard." Next Part 10. Part 10 Final Chat GPT, Part 10, Final Salute. Months later, the film premiered at the Naval Heritage Center in D.C. The theater was packed, active duty SEALs, retired officers, cadets, journalists, and even a former president. But one seat in the front row remained empty until the last minute. Then the doors opened. Margaret Ellis entered. She wore a deep navy blue suit. No medals, no uniform, just a silver seal trident pinned over her heart. Her walk was slow, deliberate. The crowd stood instantly. Not for fame. Not for celebrity. For reverence. The film was raw. Unflinching. It told of her covert missions, her leadership under fire, and the years she stayed in the shadows so others could come home. But it also showed what happened in that grocery store parking lot, and how that moment brought her story to light. When the credits rolled, the room didn't applaud right away. It rose to its feet, in complete silence. A tribute. A gesture understood by every veteran in the room. Then, slowly, the applause built, quiet, steady, rising like a tide until it became a thunderous standing ovation. Later, as the crowd mingled, a young reporter approached her. "Chief Ellis, after all this attention, all the recognition, what do you want your legacy to be?" Margaret looked out the window, where the flags fluttered above the Lincoln Memorial. She spoke softly. "I want them to know we were always there. We didn't need the credit. Just the chance to serve with honor." The reporter paused. "And now that the world knows who you are." Margaret's eyes didn't leave the horizon. She gave a faint smile. "Now they know to look twice." Then she turned away, quiet, powerful, legendary. And as the sun dipped below the Capitol dome, Margaret Ellis walked into history the same way she had walked through every battlefield, undefeated. Unseen, until it mattered most. And unforgettable.